Today, we're jumping right into some of the most critical stories shaping our world from today's newspaper. We'll be taking a deep dive into 6 key articles, revealing surprising connections and essential insights across global finance, cutting-edge AI, public health, ancient history, and even the evolving landscape of work and education.
Yeah, our mission is really to extract those vital insights, the surprising facts and the crucial context you need to be truly well-informed fast.
Exactly. So let's start with this editorial on a pretty fascinating shift in global development finance. We're seeing India's development cooperation with the Global South practically double,
Right.
from around $3 billion back in 2010-11 to about $7 billion in 2023-24. That's a huge surge.
It really is.
But this piece, it's highlighting a red flag from India's Ministry of Finance about their traditional approach, the lines of credit. So what's driving this caution?
Well, that's a crucial point. Historically, India would borrow from global capital markets, then they'd relend those resources to partner countries, but at concessional rates.
Yeah.
So they were essentially absorbing the interest rate difference themselves. But, well, that model has become increasingly unsustainable.
How so?
With the rise in global liquidity crisis and, many partner countries really struggling with their repayment capabilities, just continuing with lines of credit as the main way to engage, it's just not viable anymore.
Right.
India is basically being forced to rethink its whole approach here.
And this isn't happening in a vacuum, is it? The bigger picture for development finance looks pretty grim.
Yeah, absolutely. Traditional official development assistance, what we usually think of as aid from places like USIO or the UK's FCDO, they're facing severe budget crises.
The editorial actually projects a really profound decline in ODA. It's expected to drop to around $97 billion,
Wow.
which is nearly a 45% cut from 2023 levels, which were, $214 billion?
That's a massive drop.
Yeah, this kind of cutback really puts a huge amount of development progress at risk, especially thinking about the Sustainable Development Goals.
Exactly. And if you connect that to the bigger picture, the investment needed for those SDGs has just surged dramatically. It went from $2.5 trillion back in 2015 to now over $4 trillion needed in 2024.
$4 trillion.
Yeah. So without a major influx of new financing, these really ambitious global targets are, frankly, going to remain out of reach. So the question for nations is, how do you adapt when the traditional money is drying up, but the needs are just getting bigger?
Which brings us nicely to what the editorial calls the Ray of Hope, Triangular Cooperation, or TRC.
TRC, right.
It's described as a new kind of innovative mechanism for pooling resources with like-minded countries. And the numbers seem to back it up. Flows from non-DICA countries reporting to the OECD jumped from just $1.1 billion in 2000 to $17.7 billion in 2022.
That's a huge increase. And the real sort of beauty of triangular cooperation is its structure. It brings together a traditional donor, usually from the global north, a pivotal country from the global south, like India perhaps, and then a partner country, often also from the global south, that directly benefits from the project.
So it's more collaborative.
Exactly. It creates these really inclusive platforms for shared learning and actually co-creating solutions that are tailored to local needs. We've already seen successful examples like Japan and Indonesia working together in ASEAN economies, or Germany and Brazil collaborating in Mozambique.
And India is clearly jumping on this model. That joint declaration in 2022 between Germany and India, for instance, it's already led to TRC projects in places like Cameroon, Ghana, Malawi, and Peru.
Right, and India's G20 presidency really emphasized expanding these collaborations with the US, UK, EU, France, including investment-driven things like the Global Innovation Partnership with the UK.
So for you listening, what does this new model really mean in the grand scheme of things?
Well, what it means for global development is a pretty fundamental shift. In a world that's, grappling with more geopolitical complexities and shrinking traditional aid budgets, triangular cooperation offers a more assured, efficacious, and cost-effective way to get development outcomes.
More bang for the buck, maybe?
Sort of, yeah. It's about leveraging smart collaborative partnerships to deliver real results, moving beyond that old donor-recipient dynamic to one of shared growth and mutual learning. It's not just new funding models. It's about making global development more resilient and effective, even when traditional donors are pulling back.
Okay, let's shift our focus now to an equally critical but maybe less discussed area: India's palliative care imperative. This next editorial really hits hard on the urgency. It highlights that millions in India endure unnecessary suffering because palliative care isn't properly integrated into the healthcare system. It's about comfort,
Yeah.
about dignity, especially for those with serious or terminal conditions.
And it's absolutely essential to clarify what palliative care really is because it's so often misunderstood. It's not just end-of-life care.
Right, that's a common misconception.
Totally. Palliative care is specialized care addressing physical pain, yes, but also the emotional, social, and spiritual needs for the patient and their family. The focus is always on alleviating suffering and improving quality of life.
Regardless of whether they're still getting treatment to cure the illness.
Exactly. Whether they're receiving curative treatment or not, that's what really distinguishes it from curative treatment, which is just focused on getting rid of the disease itself.
And the gap in access to this kind of care is, well, it's alarming looking at the numbers. WHO estimates 40 million people globally need it annually, 78% of them in low and middle income countries. But only 14% actually get it.
Only 14%.
And in India, it's even starker. Between 7 and 10 million people need it each year, but only 1% to 2% have access.
1 to 2%, that's incredibly low.
It is. So what are the core reasons for this huge disconnect? Especially since demand is only going up with the rise in non-communicable diseases like cancer, diabetes.
Well, the challenges are systemic. Even though palliative care was formally included in India's national health policy back in 2017, access is just incredibly uneven, especially in rural areas or for economically disadvantaged groups.
What's the biggest hurdle?
A primary barrier is the acute shortage of trained professionals. While India's overall doctor population ratio, 1.834, actually beats the WHO norms,
Oh, interesting.
the number of specialists, specifically in palliative care, is disproportionately low. So how can you provide comprehensive care if the expertise just isn't widely available?
Makes sense.
And then you've got limited funding, inadequate infrastructure, it's not properly integrated into hospitals. And a big one, often underestimated, is just low public awareness.
Right. People don't know what it is or when to ask for it.
Exactly. Which leads to misconceptions and people accessing these services way too late, missing out on crucial support earlier on.
So given those challenges, what are the paths to improvement suggested in the editorial? It sounds like it needs a multi-pronged approach, starting with medical education.
Absolutely. One of the most impactful ideas is integrating palliative care right into the core MBBS curriculum. So future doctors get essential skills in pain management, communication, empathy, right from the start.
Build it in from the ground up.
Precisely. And projects by the ICMR and AIMS are already making moves there. Beyond doctors, though, task shifting is key.
Task shifting, what's that?
Basically empowering India's huge base of nurses, over 3.4 million registered nursing personnel, and the 1.3 million allied healthcare professionals. Give them targeted training.
So they can help bridge the gap, especially in rural areas.
Exactly where specialist access is minimal. Then policymakers need to recognize the long-term benefits and actually allocate dedicated funding. Insurance schemes like Ayushman Bharat should expand coverage.
And learn from other countries.
Definitely. India can learn from models like the U.S. system, especially its funding and hospice care infrastructure, but obviously adapt it carefully to India's own unique cultural and economic context.
And crucially, that public awareness piece. The editorial stresses campaigns to, demystify palliative care, make it clear it's not just end of life. It's pain management, psychological support, better quality of life at any stage of a serious illness. So, for you listening, understanding this gap, it's not just medical, it's humanitarian. Systemic changes here can bring real dignity and comfort to millions currently suffering unnecessarily. Okay, let's pivot now to an opinion piece looking hard at India's AI ambitions. India wants to be a global leader in AI governance, pushing this inclusive, human-centric approach.
Which sounds great on paper.
Right. But this article argues that very aspiration is at risk because there isn't a comprehensive, democratically anchored national AI strategy.
That's the absolute core of the critique. The author makes a sharp distinction between a mission and a strategy. India's current efforts are focused on the India AI mission,
Okay.
which is led by a bureaucrat housed within a Section 8 company, basically a nonprofit entity. The argument is a mission executes priorities, but it doesn't define them.
So the big questions are unanswered.
Exactly. Fundamental things like, what are India's national AI priorities? What are the core governance values? What's the institutional structure? These remain unresolved, leaving this big void.
And the risks of this unstructured approach, the article says, are not abstract at all. They're really pressing, like strategic dependencies.
Yeah, think about AI tech getting embedded in defense, intelligence, critical infrastructure. Without a clear domestic strategy, you risk relying too heavily on foreign tech, which could seriously compromise strategic autonomy.
And data governance, too.
Huge issue. As public data platforms get built, if there aren't transparent, democratically debated frameworks, you risk reinforcing corporate power and just eroding public trust.
What's the most immediate, tangible risk discussed?
I'd say employment disruption. Automation is already changing India's labor market. The article gives some stark data. In 2024 alone, the top 3 IT firms shed nearly 65,000 jobs.
65,000.
Yeah, and the IMF estimates 26% of the Indian workforce is exposed to generative AI, with maybe 12% at direct risk of displacement. But what's missing, the piece argues, is any real input from labor economists or civil society in these AI initiatives.
That seems like a massive oversight. How can you shape the future of work without talking to the people who understand its human impact?
Exactly. And it points to a broader lack of foresight. The article also flags that AI is extraordinarily energy hungry. The IEA projects global data center electricity demand might double by 2030.
Double.
Yeah. Now, put that next to India's own challenges. 11 of its 20 largest cities already face acute water stress. Groundwater levels are dropping fast in places like Bengaluru and Hyderabad, which are becoming AI hubs.
So the resource implications, they're barely being addressed.
Right, and these could have huge environmental and societal impacts down the line. AI's impact goes way beyond just tech. It's going to reshape work, education, the whole social contract. It'll determine what skills matter, how people get trained, who benefits economically.
And these huge shifts can't just be left to the market or a few experts.
Absolutely not. They demand a proper national dialogue. Plus, you have critical concerns around trust and accountability, AI in healthcare, policing. Without clear rules and oversight, you risk bias, discrimination, and losing public trust.
So if India wants to be that credible voice for the global South in global AI discussions, it needs its own house in order first. What's the path forward suggested here?
The author lays out 3 concrete steps. First, publish a cabinet-endorsed national AI strategy, present it to Parliament for debate.
Okay, make it public and official.
Second, set up a dedicated standing committee in Parliament, specifically for AI and emerging tech, for ongoing oversight and ethical scrutiny.
Right.
And third, commission a proper national impact study on AI-driven job disruption with detailed data to actually inform policy.
So for you, the listener, the takeaway is that India's AI future isn't just technical, it's deeply democratic. Without a debated national strategy, huge decisions about jobs, privacy, resources, even security could end up being made behind closed doors. Okay, let's switch gears completely now to a really fascinating scientific story. This one is challenging some long-held ideas about history. A new study in current biology used whole genome data to look at the migration history of Sinhalese and Adivasi people in Sri Lanka.
Yeah, this is really cool stuff.
What's so surprising about what they found, especially compared to older theories?
Well, the truly groundbreaking part is the core genetic finding. The study found that the Sinhalese and the indigenous Adivasi people are genetically closest to each other, and perhaps surprisingly, to South Indians.
South Indians, not North Indians.
Primarily South Indians, yeah. Specifically, Dravidian-speaking groups with higher ancestral South Indian, or ASI ancestry. ASI is basically a major ancient genetic component found widely in indigenous groups across South Asia.
So why is that surprising?
Because it challenges previous theories that often linked Sinhalese origins more exclusively to North India. That was mainly because their language, Sinhala, is Indo-European, like languages in North India.
Right, so you have this mismatch. Indo-European language, but South Indian genetics. That's the puzzle.
Exactly. It's a classic genetic linguistic discordance. The authors offer a couple of speculative explanations. One possibility is that the migration from North India might have been by a group that was already genetically quite similar to South Indian Dravidian speakers.
Ah, okay, so they brought the language, but genetically were already closer to the South.
Or the other idea, which is really interesting for understanding how culture spreads, is that maybe a small, perhaps elite group from North India migrated, transmitted their language, but didn't contribute their genes broadly to the existing population.
Ah, so the language spread more than the genes did.
Precisely. It shows how biological evolution and cultural evolution, like language change, can follow really different paths. Genes don't always map directly onto language. History is just more complex than simple stories.
The study also puts a date on the formation of the Sinhalese genetic pool, about 3,000 years ago.
Yeah, and that timing lines up pretty neatly with major genetic mixing events that were happening in India itself between about 2,000 and 4,000 years ago. That's when the sort of ancestral North Indian and ancestral South Indian genetic spectrum we see today really formed.
And what about the Adivasi connection,
Mhm.
the indigenous people?
The study strongly supports the idea that the Adivasis were already living in Sri Lanka when the ancestors of the Sinhalese arrived. This fits with historical chronicles and anthropology too.
Okay.
And what's really notable is the amount of genetic mixing. Both the Sinhalese and Sri Lankan Tamils mixed heavily with the Adivasi, which significantly shaped the Adivasi genetic structure we see today.
Are there differences within the Adivasi groups?
Yes, on a finer scale, the interior Adivasi clans show slightly higher ancient hunter-gatherer ancestry. They also have smaller population sizes and signs of endogamy marrying within the group, which leads to lower genetic diversity.
And lower diversity can have health implications, right?
It potentially can, yes. That's a significant finding.
And this is the first study using such high-resolution genome data from these specific groups.
That's right. First time for both indigenous Adivasi and urban Sinhalese populations with this level of detail.
So for you listening, what's the big takeaway here from this genetic deep dive?
Well, it's a real aha moment, isn't it? It shows how cutting-edge science can uncover these hidden histories and complex connections. It really shifts our understanding of human movement across South Asia, highlighting how deeply interconnected India and Sri Lanka have been historically. It challenges common beliefs about identity and migration, reminding us that our picture of the past is always evolving with new discoveries.
Let's turn our attention now to India's gig economy. It's a huge, growing sector changing how people work. The 2025 union budget did take some positive steps, formally recognizing gig and platform workers, extending social protection.
Which is good, on the face of it.
Right. But the text we looked at points out this crucial paradox. Despite the recognition, India's main labor statistics source, the Periodic Labor Force Survey, the PLFS 2025, still doesn't properly account for this workforce. They're basically statistically invisible.
And that's the core problem with really widespread implications. The Code on Social Security from 2020 actually defines a gig worker, someone earning outside a traditional employee relationship and platform work using an online platform for services for payment.
So the definition exists?
Yes. And India IOG projected back in 2022 that the gig workforce could hit a massive 23.5 million by 2029-30.
23.5 million.
Huge numbers.
Right.
But despite the definition and the scale, the PLFS just keeps lumping gig work into these vague old categories like self-employed, on-account workers, or casual labor.
So even if the ministry says gig workers are covered in theory, the survey isn't actually capturing the unique reality of digital labor.
Exactly. It misses crucial things like workers juggling multiple roles on different platforms, their total dependence on algorithms, the lack of formal contracts, and importantly, the absence of safety metrics. It's just not like traditional self-employment where you own your tools or process.
Right. Here they rely entirely on the platform's digital reach. The self-employed label feels misleading.
Very misleading. And this statistical invisibility, it has direct, often severe consequences for the workers. Policymakers, welfare boards, they rely heavily on PLFS data for evidence-based policy.
But if the data doesn't clearly show gig workers, their numbers, their specific needs,
Then access to vital Social Security schemes like the Social Security Fund or the National Social Security Board becomes uneven, even exclusionary. Think about a food delivery person working for both Swiggy and Zomato. Their complex reality, their specific security needs just get flattened into one inadequate category. It doesn't reflect their situation or allow for targeted support. It's recognition without proper representation.
it really is. So while recent efforts like e-Shram registration or health coverage under Ayushman Bharat show the state recognizes them,
Which is progress.
the article powerfully argues that the statistical systems themselves, like PLFS, have to evolve. They need to reflect how work is actually changing. What does this mean for policy going forward?
Well, it raises that critical question. How can policies be truly inclusive and effective if the data driving them is incomplete or miscategorized? The article strongly calls for updating the PLFS classification codes, or maybe introducing specific survey modules just to capture gig work distinctly.
So for you, the listener, it's vital to grasp how accurate data directly affects the lives and welfare of this huge, growing part of the workforce. It's not just numbers. It's about ensuring policy genuinely supports the changing nature of work in the digital age, so no one gets left behind just because they're invisible in the stats. Okay, finally, let's dive into the shifting world of higher education in India. There's some pretty significant positive news from the QS International University rankings.
Yes, definitely some upward movement.
For the first time, over 50 Indian universities are in the top 1,500 globally. That's a big jump from just 11 back in 2015 to 54 in the 2026 rankings. IIT Delhi is a standout, climbing to rank 123. And 8 new universities made the list, including Ashoka University.
That's definitely worth celebrating as a sign of progress. And it helps understand the QS metrics, how they judge universities globally.
Right. What goes into the ranking?
Well, academic reputation is huge. It's 30%. Impactful research is 25%. That combines citations and international research networks. Diversity, international faculty and students is 10%. Student outcomes, employer reputation, placements, that's 20%. And campus sustainability is the final 5%.
Okay, so it's quite comprehensive.
Very. And these rankings show how Indian universities are increasingly trying to align with these global standards, making them more comparable internationally.
But while there's progress, the analysis also points to clear areas for improvement, right? Like the student-to-faculty ratio.
Absolutely. India's average is around 19 students per faculty member. To be really competitive globally, that needs to get closer to 10 or 15 to 1. Ashoka University, which you mentioned, is an example there at 11.5 to 1 for their undergraduates. Shows it's possible.
And international diversity is another area.
Yeah, that's a big one. Most Indian universities have very few international students, and public universities often face hurdles in hiring international faculty, which directly hits their scores on those diversity metrics.
What about research? That's usually key for rankings.
It is, and historically in India, especially in STEM, a lot of top-level research happened in dedicated research institutes, not so much within the universities themselves. That's quite different from the global norm, where universities are the main research hubs.
But that's changing.
It seems to be, yeah. Especially with the National Education Policy 2020, really pushing for more research within universities. That's a positive shift.
And student outcomes, placements. That's crucial for students today.
For sure. Public universities didn't traditionally focus much on graduate employment, unlike, say, the IITs or IIMs, which always had strong placement cells. But now, even central universities are prioritizing placements and employer reputation more, knowing it's critical for rankings.
And that last bit, campus sustainability.
Right, that's a growing factor globally. Universities are paying more attention to environmental aspects on campus, energy use, waste, etc. It all contributes to their overall standing.
So pulling it all together, what does this mean for Indian universities aiming higher? What are the key actions needed?
It really means focusing intensely on several fronts, building those global research networks, attracting top faculty skilled in both research and teaching, actively recruiting and supporting international students and faculty, working much more closely with industry for job opportunities, and seriously investing in campus sustainability.
So for you listening, this deep dive gives some real insight into what makes a world-class university today and how Indian institutions are striving to meet and hopefully surpass those standards. It shows this really dynamic, competitive landscape in higher education, and that has big implications for future students and professionals everywhere. Thank you for listening. If today's episode gave you something useful, consider following us on Spotify so you're the first to hear the next one. You can give suggestions by contacting on Twitter handle given in the episode description. We are always eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.